Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that set the internet on fire this week is what's actually going on the battlefield and what's going to happen if the US pulls out completely from supporting Ukraine, or even maybe if it starts supporting Russia.
Hello, how are you doing? Thank you for having me today. I appreciate being on. My name is Bradley Crawford. I am the commander of TKAG, a Tactical Combat Advisory Group. Just a little bit about what we do. We train Ukrainian soldiers here in Ukraine to prepare them for combat conditions and the battlefield that they're going into. And along with our team, we've been here for the last 3 years training Ukrainians, and we've trained about 22 brigades and about 5,000 soldiers. We've also worked with many departments of Ukraine to provide training programs on a national level and a national scale. And it's a great honor for us to be here in Ukraine.
That's amazing. What makes you different? Obviously, we talked a little bit before this, and I just want the people who are going to be listening to it to kind of make a distinction between what you do and various different training organizations on the ground in Ukraine that might seem like they do similar work to you. So, what makes your organization different from let's say, the majority of the known training centers in Ukraine that are founded and conducted by foreigners?
I believe that everybody has an important role in Ukraine. I think whatever the scale, I think that every international person that's over here serving or working or volunteering or assisting either the Ukrainian army or the civilians is somebody that's very special. Uh, there are many organizations in Ukraine that provide training assistance, and like I say before, I appreciate every single one of them. Our group specializes in higher level education for the Ukrainian Army. We actually train trainers and instructors at training bases, training centers, other things we work with higher levels of the Ukrainian government to build national training programs. And we actually advise, teach, and assist instructors for those types of programs. We provide everything from basic military training all the way up to non-commissioned officer training and officer training. We also train brigade level staffs, battalion level staffs, and we also do things like armored infantry and many other field type operations to assist brigade commanders to do their part on the battlefield and to win. So that's what we do in our team. It's crucially important for people to come here and assist the Ukrainian army. Like I said before, we've been doing this for about 3 years now. For me, our team's been doing this off the radar for about 2 years. What made me come on here and want to talk to people about what's going on in Ukraine is because the United States administration has basically pulled the rug out from the Ukrainians. And I think it's kind of our responsibility, the guys like me, the American guys like me that are over here that have been serving with the Ukrainian military, the army, training the soldiers, having eyes on the ground, to be able to tell the story, the true story about what's going on here in Ukraine so that the American public can understand how important, how vitally important it is for them to support Ukraine and to fight against this Russian war of aggression.
Well, it's really honorable from I know obviously anytime I say that to someone, they kind of get flushed a little bit and like don't want to admit that that's something, that what they're doing is a big thing. But honestly, as a Ukrainian who's lived in America for, I guess, a good half of my life, I'm very thankful to people like you who are doing that. I do have information that in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, you were working with the 36th Brigade, one of the brigades that was stuck in Mariupol, for lack of a better word, that was then was surrendered to the Russian military, obviously, because there was no other choice. So you were training Ukraine. You were training the Ukrainian military not just as like on a camp training ground, but also within the parameters of real battle, right?
Yes, ma'am. A lot of times when we've actually went to train with the Ukrainians, we have been forward with the battle brigades, especially during the times of the initial invasion, the start of the war. like you were talking about before with the 36th Marine Brigade. We were down in Mykolaiv at that time, and I know everybody here understands how close the Russian forces were to Mykolaiv at that time. During the time we were training the 36th Brigade, we came under constant enemy fire probably about 5 or 6 times. And they targeted our team in various training locations. They destroyed installations that our team was in or used. And also, I was a victim to a direct strike on a residence that I was staying in, where the enemy used a caliber missile. They got direct information about where I was staying, and luckily they missed by about 30 meters. I still sustained some minor damage, the glass, shrapnel, and so a little bit of burns and things like that. But thank God that nothing happened to me, and I got very lucky. But quick answer to your question. When we go to train these men, we go to where the fight is most times. When we're out there on these training grounds with the battle brigades, we can hear the artillery in the background. We can hear the rocket fire. We can hear the battle going on full bore. And, we're not in Lviv. We're not in Kiev. We're not in these rear training areas training men. We're right there where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of times, it's a very dangerous thing. So we just try our best to support Ukraine as much as possible.
How did you, what prompted you to come to Ukraine? Because you said that you were here from the very beginning of the full-scale invasion. Were you here before the invasion started, or did you come here right after?
No, I came after. I came a couple weeks after the invasion, and I had a buddy of mine, United States Army soldier. He was a combat advisor, and basically like just an advisor that's working with your guys in the Reef before the war happened. And he basically gave me a call and he said, "Hey, Brad, turn on TV, man. You need to look what's going on." And I think it was about 1 a.m. my time. And I turned on the TV and I seen that the Russians, invaded Ukraine. And I said, "Oh no." I said, "Geez, oh Pete's, this ain't good." And it kind of wore on my mind for a while. And then I kind of heard President Zelensky say, "Hey, if you want to come and help defend us, if you want to come here and fight for us, we'd like to have you." So I kind of worked that out, spent my time getting over here. uh, started with a couple units with the Legion, and then they found out all my qualifications, being a master trainer, working at National Training Center in Fort Ord, California, where we trained every single brigade in the United States Army, working at a Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana. It's the same thing. They're national level training centers, and I was actually an instructor in the United States Army for 4 years, working in the basically it was an experimental unit at the time, but we were the precursor to what they call now the Security Force Assistance Brigade, and that brigade's primary mission is just to train foreign soldiers. That's it. So back then we were preparing combat units to deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan to support the Iraq and Afghani armies. And so when it came to Ukraine, it was a perfect fit for me because I already had the experience to do it, I had the training to do it, and I had the motivation to do it. And I thought to myself, I said, well, if somebody's going to come over here, if it ain't going to be me, who's it going to be? So I just decided it was my calling, and that's when I started working with Ukraine, and it's been a very interesting and rewarding experience for me.
What sort of changes do you see with the training of the Ukrainian military on the day that you first got here versus today? And sort of what strikes you the most about the changes, or like kind of how the Ukrainian military is structured or conducted, and what sort of things we can make better, or what things are you helping to make better?
Well, I can tell you this: there's definitely been radical changes since from 2022 to now, and that is something that is very, very incredible. Because usually, uh, in the military, when you go to war, you're stuck with the training, you're stuck with the equipment, you're stuck with the tactics, and during wartime, it's very hard to change any of those things. Uh, when we first started working with the training centers, there wasn't really a lot of standards. We were helping these guys develop standards. I was sitting with colonels and brigade commanders and guys and commanders of these training centers, and we're working out uh, 2 week, 3 week, 4 week training plans for these guys to help them out. We're training new instructors and all those kind of things. Uh, Now in 2025, when I go to a new training center, I'm actually starting to see standardization. I'm actually starting to see instructors that are trained and proficient. I'm starting to see a system of training that is actually adequate for the soldiers' needs and actually gets them to the battle brigades so that the battle brigades can kind of polish them up a little bit. Uh, there's a huge difference now between how it was in 2022 to 2025, and that's just on the training side. When we're talking about the the combat effectiveness of these brigades, uh, I had an interview, I think it was about 2 weeks back, where I kind of talked about this. When we first started working with 36th Marine Brigade, they were doing initial planning for the counteroffensive in Kherson, and we were doing these battle drills and basically like war games. And I walked into this battalion command or brigade command post, and there's a couple computers and a couple radios, and they're laying down maps on a table, and they're taking out their map markers and drawing directly on the maps. Usually you don't do that. Usually you put like clear, it's called acetate, or just like plastic, it's like plastic over the top, and then you draw with your icons, symbols, and things with the map markers on there. So I was kind of sitting there and I'm like, I don't know how this is going to go. And then it was a couple months ago, I went into a brigade command post and I actually looked around, and there was computer screens everywhere and digital layouts everywhere, and you had an operations cell and an intelligence cell and a logistics like cell. And when I said cell, it's like a corner where like they work. And you got drone feeds up everywhere. You got cameras on towers. They're looking at every single portion of the battlefield. Intelligence guys got maps of every one of the enemy positions that they know about, and they're working on them and doing all that stuff. And there's one word that I use for that: military decision making process, MDMP. And they were actually planning for a future operation, and they were using the MDMP process, something that I did not see in 2022 very much. And it was, and when I walked in there and I'm looking around and I'm just thinking to myself, and I just said, if this was 5 years ago and I walked in here, I'd expect these guys to be wearing American uniforms. It was that professional. And to get from that level in 2022 to this level in 2025, it's incredible. And I say this just in closing on this question that you have. I think if this war goes on for another year or two, Ukrainian army is going to be the best army in Europe, hands down, operationally, technically, and training wise, the whole 9 yards, because they're developing at such a fast rate that they're going to have not only all the combat experience, they're going to have all the experience for operations and logistics and intelligence, and they're going to be a very solid organization. So
Yeah, because I'm assuming no amount of military exercises, no matter how much budget or no matter how much like supply you have for your military, is going to compensate for actual battlefield experience and needing to kind of grow as you go as fast as you possibly can. Which is what gives Ukraine an advantage, is because realistically in Europe we're the only military that has combat experience in a defense type of war and in a war in our own territory, right, since World War II. But that's actually very interesting that you've mentioned that you've answered the question of the Ukrainian military progress in this way, because there are lots of Americans, right, and also the current American government that did pull out the rug from under Ukraine. And a lot of people have this opinion that once the US, or if the US, let's face it, once the US stops funding Ukraine at all, right, Ukraine is just going to fall to Russia. What's your take on that?
I don't believe so, but I do know something. They won't fall to Russia. They'll find a way to get around it. But the problem is that there'll be more casualties. There'll be far more casualties. Us Ukrainians, and I call myself a Ukrainian. I've been working here for 3 years, and I really have a deep bond with you guys. The casualties that we would suffer would be tremendous, and it would be a disaster on that level. But I will say this: the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian soldiers, they'll never surrender. They'll never give up. And that's one thing that I learned when I first got here. When Kiev was surrounded on three sides, they fought and they fought and they fought. And these same people that you're talking about on the news, Kiev will fall by tomorrow. Kiev will fall in 3 days. Kiev will fall in a week. Kiev will fall in a month. Well, we all know, because I think it's day 1,156 now. They were dead wrong on that. So I think the Ukrainians have a fighting spirit that the entire world does not understand. And if they did understand, especially the Russians, I think they would be taking some very serious steps to ending this conflict as quickly as possible, because the Russians can throw any amount of material or men or equipment at these people. They're not going to stop. And that's just the bottom line. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, I think there is a fundamental misunderstanding, I guess, both within Russia and the Russian authorities, and I guess the rest of the world that doesn't support Ukraine, or like the rest of the people in the world that don't support Ukraine or don't care enough. The fundamental misunderstanding is that the sort of like the U.S. not giving Ukraine support or weapons or standing by Ukraine is not going to mean that Ukrainians are going to surrender. It's going to mean that actually that's going to contribute to a lot more casualties and to a lot more deaths. It's similar to, obviously, you know about the missile strike that happened in Kyiv last night, which was by far one of the worst that I have experienced since my time here, and I've been here since 2023. And I am not the type of person, I honestly, I think everybody who's watched any of my interviews or any of my political analysis knows that I'm a terrible person when it comes to personal safety. I only go to the bomb shelter when it's absolutely necessary, and that absolutely necessary evaluation only happens in my head. Because realistically, you should go as a civilian to the bomb shelter in most situations. But you know, when you live under missile shelling all the time, it's kind of you start picking and choosing, and you have like levels of threats in your head. Yesterday was the time where I actually like ran out of bed and I ran to the bomb shelter with my dogs because it was that loud and it was that close. And I think the reason why these missile strikes were happening is, first of all, Easter, obviously, and secondly, it's because there is this peace negotiation happening, and Putin is trying to force Ukrainian people into surrender by literally killing us and making it unbearable for us to exist in these conditions. But what he doesn't realize, and I guess what the rest of the world doesn't realize, is that when you put Ukrainians between like sort of a choice of surrendering or fighting harder, usually the more strenuous the circumstance, the harder we fight, because this doesn't make us want to surrender. Like, yes, I'm tired, I haven't slept, yesterday was difficult and yesterday was terrifying, but at the same time it didn't make me want to, oh my gosh, let's negotiate, right? No, it makes me hate Russia even more, and it makes me want to do more in order for the end of this war to come faster. And by the end, I don't mean military defeat or surrender or a peace deal, I mean military defeat of Russia, right? So I think that's a very big misconception that a lot of people have, where they think it all depends on the American weapons. There's also this
No,
misconception.
absolutely. Oh, can I get in there? Absolutely not. It does not depend on American weapons. When we started this war, we were fighting with Soviet weapons. All right. So the American weapons just minimize the casualties and actually give us the ability to do deep strikes on the enemy, more precision, more precise, and give us the ability to have some better target packages when it comes to destroying enemy assets. Um, and that's one thing about the American weapons. But when it comes down to it, it's really not about the weapon that a man carries. It's about the spirit of a man or a woman and the motivation and morale that they have to fight for their country, their family, and themselves. And like I say before, Ukraine has a pretty unbreakable bond on all three of those things. And they really need to understand that, it doesn't matter if you take the weapons away, if you do all these other things, Ukrainians are going to fight. Hmm.
Well, Ukrainians, as you mentioned, did fight. I guess like my second misconception is that people think Ukrainians started getting American weapons maybe like 3 days into this war, or maybe like 3 weeks into this war, when in reality the first batch of American supplied weapons came in July or June or something like that. By that time, it's been 3 months. So it's well, batch of serious weapons. I guess we got javelins quite fast. But at the same time, like this entire time, we were fighting with what people would call pitchforks, right? It was just sort of like old equipment that gets jammed and had to be resurrected from a long time in a basement somewhere in a military storage facility. But at this, so it really doesn't depend on the weapons. It depends on the motivation, which brings me to my next question, right? Since you've seen battlefield so much in Ukraine, what do you think differentiates Ukrainian motivation and Russian motivation, and what motivation, if any, do Russian soldiers have to continue this war?
Ukrainian and Russian soldiers are about, when it comes to the front line, they're both up there. When you go up there to that line, it sucks. It's not fun. I can tell you personally. I didn't spend a whole lot of time up there on the front, but I was actually on the zero line. I went up with the 28th Mechanized before we retook Kherson, and I spent about 48 hours up there with the battalion, and we got hit about 200 times by every kind of piece of artillery, mortar system, anything you can name, and it was just constant back to back. The boys up there, the guys up there that are doing the fighting, they're fighting a hard fight. But here's the thing about when you ask a question like this that a lot of people need to understand. Ukraine, the soldiers of Ukraine up there in those positions, they're fighting for their land, their homes, their country, and their families. And when they go up there, they have the motivation that they have to hold that line because they want to come back to their homes and their families and their loved ones. The Russian soldiers, a lot of these guys, they either get forced into conscription or they get forced into it by the money. And a lot of Russian soldiers, especially the guys that we've captured or done POW interviews with, not us, but the Ukrainians, of course. I was going to clarify that. They have said time and time again, hey, I came from a poor village. They were offering me large sums of money to come to Ukraine. It was going to change my life, and I didn't realize what I was getting into. So when you have an army that has no motivation of fighting a war for God and country, okay, I'm talking about Russia, and then you have an army like Ukraine that has that motivation. And I just heard an impact outside. Something just hit. So I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm all right. Uh, uh, when they have that motivation, okay, it's for Russia, it's not a winning battle for them. Eventually, the money and all those things are not going to be something that's going to be good enough to bring people into the war. And they're going to know eventually that it's not a war worth fighting for. The Ukrainians, I don't see any kind of downfall in the morale or any of that because the Ukrainians are fighting for the same exact thing they've been fighting for the whole time, their country.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you know, speaking of the Russia money is not being enough, it seems like it isn't enough these
attention,
days, right? Because
air
Russia,
raid alert.
oh,
See? Sorry.
you're in the area where the air raid comes on after something gets hit, which is also,
Well,
I guess,
it was the Ishglander that just hit, and I definitely know it was. So
yeah. I think for the viewers to sort of have a general picture, in Kyiv, usually it's an air raid first and then something hits. In a lot of eastern regions of Ukraine, something hits first and then an air raid catches up because the distance between the launch site in Russia and the impact site in Ukraine is quite small. So it usually takes a couple of, well, not even a minute probably in certain areas for, depending on which type of missile or which type of weapon they're launching, it's quite fast. But it does seem like money is not enough for Russia. It's becoming not enough for Russia because we have seen large numbers of African students being recruited into the Russian military under the guise of getting scholarships in Moscow universities and then just being thrown onto the front line the second that they arrive in Russia, right? We have seen large numbers of North Korean soldiers fighting for Russia. So it does seem like they are drained of sort of like willingly mobilizing resources or people who are willing to mobilize themselves. So what's your sort of idea of that? How do you see that?
well, what I see is, like I said before, and if this war goes on any further, we're going to start seeing a steady decline of the Russian army, and we're going to start seeing an increase in the Ukrainian army. And what I'm talking about is morale. All right, morale's already at an all-time low for the Russian army. The guys that are coming in, like I said, they're not coming in for anything, but they're not coming in for God and country or I'm a patriot of Russia or anything like that. They're coming in for a paycheck. The Russian economy is a very bad economy right now. It's really hard to find jobs, and they offer some pretty lucrative contracts to these guys, these college students, these kids, all this stuff to come in, and it gives them an opportunity to get out of the situations that they find themselves in their own country. So, I would say, in response to your question, I believe I answered your question in fullness there. Um, really, the only winner that's going to happen with this conflict is that Ukraine is going to win. It's going to take time. It's going to be a very difficult situation for us, but time is on our side. A lot of people say time is not on our side. I say it is. And if you want a historical example of that, all you have to do is look in the old days with the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. When they went into Afghanistan, they had 20, 30 times the number of soldiers of the Afghanistan militias and everything else. They fought 10 hard years there to try to secure that territory. And at the end of the day, they financially couldn't support it. The morale was totally gone, and the country didn't believe in the war anymore. And my belief about this is that you're going to see the same thing in Ukraine if this does continue.
Yeah, especially because it's not necessarily bringing results for Russia, right? I think another misconception worth addressing is that when we talk about, there are all of these people who are like, Ukraine is losing this war, Russia is winning this war, right? If you're objectively looking at it, it's taking Russia 3.5 years to capture a very small portion of land. And the way that, and when people, especially not military people, sort of talk about the battlefield and how the battlefield is progressing, and when Russia takes certain like little towns or something, what is the actual, if we look at from the day of the beginning of the war to today, what is Russia's military progress in Ukraine really like?
Not very much. Look, when you're losing whole entire companies, rota companies, and you're only taking 2 kilometers of ground and into ground assault, that's not very much, and it's like that all along the front line. Yeah, I hear people every day, hey, the Russians are advancing every day. Yeah, well, we're advancing on certain spots too every day. Now, are the Russians advancing? Yes, but they're literally advancing kilometers a day, and they're losing hundreds to thousands of guys to get it. All right. And if you want to talk about, okay, well, they're probably losing 300 guys for a kilometer. I
That's
mean, that's
an
that's huge. That's
that's
massive.
that's an
During my wars that I fought in as a soldier in the army, of course, like I said before, I'm a career soldier. I was in the army for almost 20 years, and I've been doing military operations in the U.S. Army and Ukraine, all that for like almost 23 years. When we were in Iraq and Afghanistan, okay, we fought there for about 10 years, and we lost 5,000 soldiers. The Russian army loses 5,000 soldiers in a week. It's just not what I would say is it's not a sustainable practice. It can't go on forever. And yes, did they have the men to do it? Yes. Do they have the willpower to do it though? And do they have the financial means to do it? That is the true question.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to compare like the worst, because I guess I want to illustrate this to people that have absolutely nothing to do with the military and don't understand the battlefield or don't understand territorial gains, right? But do know about like let's say wars that America participated in. What was the absolute most like commonly known as like a failure for America in terms of warfare, and how does that compare to Russia's results today?
Well, we fought our own war like this, in Vietnam. Vietnam for us was a very costly lesson, and we went into Vietnam, and it was the same kind of thing. We fought against an insurgent army that was fighting for their own land and their own country, and we tried to prop up a government of South Vietnam that really didn't have much of a heart, to fight. And we invested a lot of men and a lot of money and a lot of materials into that fight. And eventually, I believe it was actually on a 10-year mark too. It was like 1965 to 1975. We had to pull out of that conflict, and we actually had to evacuate out of the country. It was that bad. Um, when we're talking, I'm not saying the Ukraine war is the same way in any means, shape, or form. Uh, Definitely not as a military man, I would say that, but to put it into a historical context for people that might not understand that kind of stuff. That's the way that I would say it for sure. So yeah.
I really do feel like it's very helpful to explain to people that are on the other end of the screen sort of like things that they can relate to, because I think a lot of the times when we talk about the war, even if we're trying to illustrate it in a relatable way, it's still a lot of figures, it's still a lot of sort of like it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of kind of like stuff that I get that you wouldn't understand if you're like an average person sitting somewhere in Iowa or well, I guess if you're in Iowa, that there is a higher chance that you have served in the military. But if you're like in Chicago or New York or like a big city where people usually I don't know watch Sex in the City rather than military analysis. It's
Uh,
hard to put the two and two together and think about it in terms that are comprehensible. So I think it's giving an example, especially to Americans, based on their own wars and progress in those wars compared to Russia, really does work. So that's why I was very eager to hear your opinion on like the parallels between that. But so what's your, I guess, a good way to summarize this conversation would be like, what do you think is going to happen going forward, let's say taking the US out of the picture? And do you think it's a possibility that with the Trump administration, with how Russia favorable they have been honestly every day, it stops being a blurred line where they're kind of pro-Russian, but not really, they're just outwardly pro-Russian at this point? Do you think there is a chance, or there is a galaxy in which the US might support Russia? And if they do so, how would that affect everything that we've talked about beforehand?
That's a good question. All right, let's start out with the beginning. One thing about me, what I like to do is I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm independent. And the other thing is I'm a soldier. So when I talk about our government, I talk about certain words like administration. Okay, so our current administration needs to understand that Russia has never been a true player in any kind of peace deal, peace talks, or anything else. Uh, Even at the peace talks and peace summits and peace agreements that they've signed throughout history, ever since World War II, there hasn't been any of those peace agreements that they've actually honored the commitments of. And for us to believe that the Russian Federation will ever honor a peace agreement, right? That they sign ink to paper to is ludicrous. Listen, as I say, Russia is a belligerent country. They've been belligerent from way before World War I, World War II, even when they were part of an empire. They just cannot put down the ways of war, and they're really gifted on the art of deception. And I believe that the current administration of the United States is really getting deceived by these guys to think that there's some kind of economic or social or, partnership that can happen with the Russians. That the Russians, uh, may I remind our audience here, still possess a large number of nuclear weapons that at a 30-minute notice are aimed at every single city in the United States and every single military base in Europe, every single military base in NATO, all the cities, major capitals of NATO allies in Europe and around the world. And we're here. We're supposed to believe that Russia has our best interests in heart. No, I don't think so. I think they play the cards quite well. They play them pretty close to the cuff. All these peace deals and talks about peace deals in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has no intention of ever honoring any one of these peace deals. The only thing Vladimir Putin wants to do is he wants to disarm Ukraine, bring it down to 50,000 soldiers so it can't defend itself, not allow it to join NATO so that if he ever decides to invade again, that he could just walk right in the door and nobody would do anything, right? Annex territories that definitely aren't his. All right, talking about Crimea and the 4 occupied territories of Ukraine that are by international law Ukrainian. All right, the Ukrainian government has not succeeded any of these. It's still written in the Ukrainian constitution that these are sovereign territories of Ukraine. So the one thing about the government, our administration also they need to understand is if we do not stand up to Russia now and we set a pattern for them to follow in the future, all right, Russia will not hesitate to move on any further ambitions or goals that they have. If they want to take Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, okay, oh, we just got done with the war in Ukraine. Well, we got away with that. Who's to say we won't get away with this? We need to take these people very seriously because there's going to come a time, if we do not, that we are going to pay a very high price for what I call our uh, what would I call that? I'm sorry. Okay, hold on. We're gonna pay a very high price for for what I call our indecisiveness. And there's going to be a major war in the future that our children are going to have to fight. And that's not going to be a war good for anybody.
Yeah, I really hope that these words resonate, especially with, you know, the Americans and also any really English-speaking people that are going to be watching this conversation, because it's very helpful to have to have an unbiased opinion from someone who is from the military, who has seen a lot of battlefield and who knows how this happens, and to kind of see their perspective on it, because I feel like, you know, that's, I guess, not the most important perspective. All perspectives are important, but it's the most educated one in terms of how warfare is. So if you don't, you know, to people that don't want to butt into politics, well, don't butt into politics. Listen to military professionals who are telling you that based on experience of war, this is what's happening and how it's going to be happening outside of politics, right? So thank you very much for doing this interview today, and thank you for expressing your opinion and for speaking up for Ukraine and for everything that you have done here, because it truly does matter a lot to all of us. And I, for one, am quite impressed and very grateful.
Well, I appreciate everything you do, ma'am, and thank you for having me on. I appreciate everything that you guys say here at the Gaze, and all the relevant and really factual, down-to-earth information that you guys give to the English-speaking world about Ukraine. And I just wish you guys the best and the most safety possible.
Thank you so much. Well, I hope that this conversation was as enjoyable and interesting for you as it is for me. If you would like to hear more conversations like that, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and also turn on all of your notifications. Send this video to a friend and give it a like. And as per usual, of course, please leave your questions, suggestions, and constructive criticism, or anything you might want to say in the comments down below. I read all of it and I keep up with you guys, and I really enjoy doing so. See you next time.